Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about the stories that we tell ourselves beyond tales of comfort. How do we tell ourselves stories in our head to make sure that we're shaping the world that we want to live in? Or we could look at it another way. How is what we're telling ourselves about ourselves and about other people shaping how we view them and our emotions? Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
Hello, friends. Welcome back. I hope that your day is going well, wherever it is, wherever you're listening to this. If you're on your way to work, if you're on your way home from work, if you're cutting the grass, cleaning the kitchen, whatever it is you're doing, I hope that your day is going well. I want to talk to you today about the stories that we tell ourselves in our heads. And this is a little bit similar to the episode about what kind of tales do we tell ourselves. Episode 285, we talked about how we can tell ourselves tales of comfort and how those tales of comfort can create actually distress for us because they keep us from seeing what is reality. They keep us from seeing the truth about the world around us. And some of you wrote in and you asked a great question. Okay, well, if I don't want to tell myself tales of comfort, I want to tell myself tales of truth. But what does that look like? Because there is another side to the tales of comfort, and that is that we tell ourselves tales of discomfort, right? We talk badly about ourselves. A friend of mine hurt his finger splitting wood this summer, and he talked about how when it first happened, he started to kind of castigate himself, and he would call himself, "Oh, you're so stupid, you're this," and that's a story that we tell ourselves. If you're talking to yourself and you're calling yourself stupid, that too is a tale that you're telling yourself that certainly shapes the world around you. Because the way we put the information together in our heads, the way that we tell the tales in our head, the way that we take pieces of information and we attach meaning to it in our head is how we make meaning. So when you, right, if you do something and maybe you go to do something or you want to do something and your first thought is, I could never do that. That is part of a tale that you're telling yourself. That is part of a system of information and meaning that you are creating in your head to make things make sense. And that shapes your view of the world around you. It's also how we make sense of the world around us, right? When you see other people, what are the thoughts that go through your brain when you see other people? What are the assumptions that you make about those people when you see them, right? You see people walking down the street, you see somebody at a grocery store, whatever it is. When you start to make sense of it, those are the stories that we have to go after. When you think of a politician, I was out in my driveway yesterday doing some work in the yard, and a guy showed up, pulls up in a car, and drives up the driveway, and he stops and he gets out and he says, "Hey, I'm looking for," and he tells me my name and my wife's name and my daughter's name, and I'm kind of like, "Well, why?" He says, "Well, I'm here to ask them if they vote and to try to convince them to vote for fill-in political candidate." And I asked him, I was like, "Does that work a lot? Do you think you talk a lot of people into who they're going to vote for?" And we had a fun conversation about it, but what was fascinating to me about it was the narrative that he told himself about the work that he was doing was shaping how he viewed things. And to be honest, he did not match the narrative in my head about how I think politics should work, and pollsters and people that come around and try to convince you of those types of things. And so he simultaneously was creating a story in his head about the world around him, and he was challenging the story in my head. And that's what we want to do, because the way that we tell ourselves stories and the story that we tell ourselves shapes things. So what do we do when we start to examine these stories? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to be aware of the story. We have to step out of the story and ask ourselves, what is the story that I'm telling myself? I was shopping with a guy yesterday, and he was looking for some technical tools. We were going for some technical tools, and he wants to help his son, and so he was looking out for a tool for his son. And as we're going through all the options, and we're looking at all the different things, We get in the truck to leave. And he says, that was fun. I just hate feeling like I'm an idiot. And I asked him, I said, well, why do you think you feel like an idiot when you're looking at those things? He's like, well, because I don't know anything. And I said, yeah, but no one's ever taught you, right? Like, it's one of those things where you've never been taught. So at some level, you have to be taught in order to know about things. Or you can self-teach, not with YouTube and all of those things. But maybe you feel like an idiot because of the story that you tell yourself in your head about who you are. And don't make no mistake, that story is often shaped in childhood. I meet people all the time, highly critical parents that you can't do enough to please. When they were kids, that creates a narrative in the person's head. And then, oh my goodness, Joe, here we go. We're going to blame everything on our childhood. No. I'm not saying we blame everything on our childhood. But it is realistic to think that that's where this comes from. And so one of the things we do is we ask ourselves, well, how am I feeling? What am I feeling? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel stupid? Do I feel like I don't belong? Do I feel like I am not adequate for this? And if so, what am I telling myself about me in this moment? So we start there. What are you telling yourself about you? Maybe you feel like you're failing as a mom or a dad or a wife or a husband. But what's the story you're telling yourself? Like, why is that? Why do you feel like you're failing? You need to run that all the way out. Maybe you feel like a failure because you made a mistake. You made a legitimate, open-ended mistake. I don't know what it would be. Just fill in the blank. But why does that mean you're failing? Well, maybe I haven't been the best. Okay, so where does the story end, right? That's one of the biggest things we talk about in counseling. And I think next week there's an episode on rumination that you're going to hear. And because I'm tired of people saying that counseling is only talking about rumination. That's just not accurate. And so we're going to go after that. But that's next week. Maybe you are failing. Maybe you need to tell a new story though, right? That's the beautiful thing about stories. You get to change the plot today. You get to change the plot today on the story that you're telling with your life. Right now, you could change the plot. You could make differences. Maybe you're telling yourself that, oh, I don't have any chance at completing this, any chance at doing this. Okay, maybe you don't, but you can't even try. Maybe you're telling yourself that no matter what I do, I will fail. Okay, maybe you will, but you can't even make an effort. Is the story in your head, I can't even try? And then would you be willing to challenge that story? Would you be willing to tell yourself, I can? How do you respond when things go badly? Oh man, this always happens to me. I just have had the worst luck, the most awful life. Maybe. Or maybe you've just had the life that people have, and now it's time to do something different. Now it's time for you to overcome, to respond. Do you tell yourself stories of responding? Do you tell yourself stories of adventure? What character are you in the stories you tell? And you know, the tales of comfort often are either tales of victimhood or tales of heroism without the hard work. But there's another side, and these are tales of victimhood or tales of inadequacy or tales of I'm just a screw up. Why? In fact, you know, it's really interesting when you do the studies. There's actually studies, and I haven't looked too deep in them, but there's actually studies that say your performance on tests, your performance in school, your performance at work, your performance in almost anything in life is improved or not. What's the opposite of improved? Disimproved or hurt. It's either made better or it's hurt by what you tell yourself about how you're going to perform. By what you tell yourself about the character that you are in the story of whatever it is you're doing. I even had a nutritionist tell me, and I've not verified this, but I even had a nutritionist tell me that your food digests differently based on what you believe about it. That seems a little crazy to me, but I'm not a nutritionist and that person was, so I trust them. So what happens in the story that you're telling yourself about you? And is there truth? Right? Is there truth? One of the things that happens is we're all in search for the story of our lives. I really believe that we're all in search for the meaning. And so what happens? What's the story you tell yourself about who you are? And how do you tell better stories? I think one of the things you do is you just step back and examine the story. Ask yourself, what's the story I'm telling myself? Whatever it is, right? I had to fix a water line a couple weeks ago. We're on a camping trip and the water line to the toilet broke and I've got to fix it. And it just is not going well. I don't have my own tools. It got worse. What's the story that I tell myself in that moment? And I can probably tell that story based on looking at my emotions and my actions to those around me. Most of the time, you're going to be able to tell what your story about yourself is based on your emotions and the actions around you, or the actions that you have towards the people around you. In other words, we want to work this backwards from how we're feeling and what we're doing. When you see a group of people, when you see other people, when you see someone laughing, when you see someone sad, when you see someone telling someone else a joke and they're laughing, how do you feel and what are you doing? Because if you're like, maybe you think they're talking about you, right? If you see someone wearing a Trump hat, make America great again and take America back. I don't know. I can never keep up with the slogans. If you're automatically like, I bet you that person beats his wife and kicks his dog, you might actually have a problem. If you see someone wearing a Kamala Harris, I can't remember the her candidate's name. It doesn't matter. Her vice president candidate. Doesn't matter. If you can't see them and be like, rah, 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 you might actually have a problem with the story that you tell yourself about people around you. This is part of the problem I think we have going on in the world today. One of the stories that we tell ourselves is that you're either completely with me or you're completely against me. There is no in between. And that seems problematic to me. So we start there by asking ourselves, what am I feeling? How do I look at people around me? What are my actions, my behaviors, right? So if I'm working on a project at home and in my head I'm thinking, oh man, this is taking me so long. I'm so dumb. I'm so stupid. This is so ridiculous. I might start getting grumpy with my family members. I might start getting grumpy with my wife if she's helping me with it, right? If you know anybody that has like a camping trailer or a boat, one of the jokes is always about backing it up, right? The truck to the trailer and all of that, or backing the boat into the water. How many couples fight about that? But what's funny is they're not actually fighting over what's going on with the camper being backed up or the boat being backed up. They're fighting over the story in their head about what all those things mean. They're fighting over what's going on inside their own heads and what that means, because that's where we make meaning. So we want to start looking for the story in our head. Then we want to ask ourselves a question. Is this a truthful story? I'm just an idiot. That's not a truthful story. Well, Joe, I'm not smart. Okay, maybe. I don't know. I mean, you're smart enough to listen to this show, but maybe you're not smart, but that doesn't make you an idiot. I just can never do this. Maybe or maybe not. We have to examine this for truth. The question I always say is, once we figure out what the line is, right? I can't do this, or I'll never get this, or I'm just not good enough for that. Then the question becomes, why do you say that? So what's the story I'm telling myself? What's that line? What's driving that? And then why am I telling myself that? That's an important distinction to make. Because what that does is that creates the reality that shapes the world around us. One of the things that I would love to see happen, and every time they've done this in studies, they have found what I'm about to suggest. One of the things that I would love to see happen is we take people who are, just blatantly one political party and make them sit down over a cup of hot beverage, coffee or tea or dinner, or even just over a table and some rocking chairs, and we make them talk. So people from one political party and people from another political party, and they find out they're not that different. But the story in their head is that they're very different. The story in their head is that they're very different. The story in their head is that we could never be friends. And so you have to run that out. What is it that I'm telling myself? What's the thing running in my head about who I am, about who the people are around me? And then why am I saying that? And can I check that for accuracy? And then can you tell yourself stories of encouragement and affirmation? Can you tell yourself true stories of encouragement and affirmation? So mine might be, you know what? I'm not as fast at changing out the lights as this guy is because he's better at it than I am. But I can still do it. I'm not as fast as this guy at doing this project, but I can still do it. I might not actually make it, doing this thing. Like right now, I'm trying to find some very specific, difficult things. I'm trying to find some partners. I might not. I might end up self-publishing, and I might not ever be a best-selling author. But what's the story I tell myself about that? I make mistakes as a dad and as a husband. But what's the story I tell myself about that? That's the important question. Because that is how we make meaning. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, why am I telling myself that? So I told a client this week or last week, I don't remember now. I think you might have ADHD. There was such a strong visceral reaction to that idea. Tears, the whole 9 yards. And the reality is that's probably because of the story in her head about what having ADHD means. And that comes from somewhere in her childhood, which is fine, but we still have to verify it. We still have to check it for truth. Right? So we want to ask ourselves, what is it? What can I boil myself down? Can I work backwards? Can I look at my emotions? Can I look at my actions? And then work my way backward to whatever my story is in my head. What is that? What is it? Can I make that one line? Can I ask myself, why am I saying that? And then can I ask myself, what does that mean? And can I verify it? And where can I replace non-truths with truths? Right? I tell this story a lot to people who are first getting into hunting. A number of years ago, I was just so angry. I hadn't seen anything for, probably about a week. And I'm getting down out of my stand and I'm starting to walk it. And this deer shows up on the hill line. I can't do anything about it. And I was just, brr. And a friend of mine was like, bro, that's why we play the game. His story was different than mine. Mine was, if I don't get a deer, there's something wrong with me. His was, no, getting a deer is fun, but I'm really out here to enjoy the sunshine, nature, the sounds. It's a totally different story, and it creates a totally different reality. And that kind of leads us to the last part of today's episode. What would it look like if you intentionally talked about a reality that you want to live in? Now, here's the thing. I'm not all into this manifest thing. I just don't think that that's rooted in reality. But I do think that oftentimes reality is shaped by the words that we speak. Well, Joe, there's no difference there. Nah, there is a difference, right? Because when I start to change my perspective from I have to get a deer to I'm out here to enjoy the sunshine, the sunrise, the sunset, the coffee that I bring with me, whatever it is, my reality doesn't actually change, and yet it starts to shape shift. It starts to move. If I'm talking to myself about parenting and all I ever talk about is how hard parenting is and how it's so difficult and these kids and those kids, then I'm going to shape my reality towards that. But if I talk about how exciting parenting is and how much I love it and how much it's a blessing and it is just a sacred, holy responsibility and it's humbling and it's awesome, that's going to shape it too. That's going to shift it too. One of the things that I always try to say when something goes wrong is, if that's the worst thing that happens today, it'll be a good day. Now, there are some things that doesn't apply to. But a lot of things that happen in a day that could spin me out, that's a great automatic story in my head shift changer. Right? Help me better shape my reality. Because most of the time, there's a guy named Chuck Swindoll. He once said that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. I actually really like that quote, but with all due respect, Chuck, I hope I can call you Chuck. We both knew Friedy Loescher, so we're connected in that way. I think life is 10% what happens to me and about 45% how I choose to view it, and then 45% about how I react to it. Because what happens when we start to shape how we react to it, when we start to shape how we talk to ourselves about reality, how we talk to other people about reality, is we start to shape reality. We start to shift the world around us. And it becomes something that is beneficial for those around us. All right, so I hope today's episode is helpful for you. Take some time. Do some self-reflection and ask yourself, how am I viewing the world around me? How am I viewing people around me? How am I viewing myself? What's the story I'm telling myself about the world around me? What's the story I'm telling myself about people around me, about my reality, about my job, about my kids, my wife, my husband? Because if we're constantly complaining, that is a story we tell ourselves. And if we're constantly practicing gratitude and thankfulness, that's also a story that we tell ourselves. All right, thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.